Members, I'm rising on the floor today to humbly give voice to thousands of Texans who have been ignored.
Well, that was a woman, both in name and face, that many of you probably didn't recognize until, well, last week. Wendy Davis, Democratic Texas State Senator, whose 11-hour filibuster to try and block an anti-abortion bill went viral last week. Her stand, it moved both the issue of abortion and certainly her own political prospects front and center in the national dialogue. Now, among those reacting is Texas Governor Rick Perry. He spoke Thursday to the National Right to Life Convention. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Even the woman who filibustered the Senate the other day was born into difficult circumstances. She was the daughter of a single woman. She was a teenage mother herself. She managed to eventually graduate from Harvard Law School and serve in the Texas Senate. It's just unfortunate that she hasn't learned from her own example, that every life must be given a chance to realize its full potential and that every life matters.
Davis, who did the round robins of political shows on Sunday morning that we were talking about earlier, well, she had something to say to what the governor had to say about her.
He's demeaned the high office that he holds by saying things like that. But the larger picture is that it's symptomatic of what really is his perspective on women.
Now, the Texas legislature, they're back in session again today, called there by the governor, just so lawmakers can pass the anti-abortion bill that failed the last time they brought it up. But there's already a school of thought out today that what's happening in Texas isn't going to stay in Texas on the subject of abortion. This could actually help the pro-choice movement by focusing on all the proposed restrictions. Same thing when it comes to the Voting Rights Act, another issue we talked about last week. Conservative Times columnist Ross Douthat, he called the Supreme Court overturn a blessing for Democrats, noting the voter ID laws actually helped rally minority turnout as recently as last November. And it will so again, he writes, if and when they put in place here by states that had been covered by the Voting Rights Act at the beginning. All right. Two issues that, I mentioned this last week, guys, that if you think about it, gay rights moving forward as an issue, forget about even the courts nationally across the system. Voting rights and abortion, depending on one's perspective, either moving backwards or again, at least back in the headlines, not just in the courts, but at the state legislatures. And, you know, in some ways, one step forward, one step back, whatever you want to call it. But to me, on the issue of choice, it's one of the few issues that I think from a Democratic base, think about guns, for example. Conservatives are more motivated by gun rights than even gun control advocates who want to do something about it. They're motivated with a pocketbook. They'll vote that way. They'll demand of their electeds to vote a certain way. Choice is one of the few issues I can think about where progressives get amped up, speak with their pocketbook here, and get motivated. And I think the scene out in Texas conceivably could work the Democrats' advantages in coming election cycles. What do you think?
You know, it could, particularly if Governor Perry continues to make statements like the one that you showed. It is hard to fathom how he could get up there and make those statements about Wendy Davis, somebody who's become so popular overnight. It's such a personal way to talk about her and her mother, somebody who's succeeded, you know, so that to me is going to work in the Democrats.
The whole idea of old guy patronizing, telling a woman what to do, right?
Yeah, well, absolutely, and talking about a single mother as if, you know, it's just the whole thing is so disturbing. But, you know, he would be somebody, those kinds of statements will certainly help the Democrats. On the Texas bill itself, there are some parts of that bill that are not, you know, that you can work with, that you can compromise on, that are actually good ideas, but not the whole. I mean, I don't agree with the whole thing, and you know, hopefully the Texas legislature gets there. But no, I think we could see. I mean, we saw the Democrats use the issue of choice in the last election nationally. We see it at the local level here in New York. We see it in Texas, and I think it's certainly going to be the same as we go forward. I think it's going to continue to be an issue. It rallies progressives, it rallies liberals. By the same token, it does rally conservatives.
You know, Bill, we all saw what happened to Todd Aiken and a handful of others when they went into bizarro land, like, oh, you can't get pregnant if you're raped because your body shuts down, and the other stuff, the insanity around the subject, and when you hear the governor saying those things. But when you look at the polls, the public, is trending more, I don't know, pro-life, but certainly they want more restrictions.
That's right, yeah.
23 weeks, I think it is, right? Or is it 20 weeks that they feel more comfortable with a limit? Now, if you go into the details of it and say the life of the woman is threatened if brought to term, then they'll change their mind. Certainly they want exceptions for rape, incest, etc. But it always seems when you have an issue like this, where even the public is slightly in support, the right wing of the party drives it too far, captures basically the messaging, and then it puts the party at conflict, and more than that, it defines the party in a way the party wouldn't want. This seems to be Exhibit A.
Yeah, I completely agree. I agree with you, Professor, completely. Both of these issues will help the Democrats, especially the abortion issue. And I've actually been working on this issue this year, and I haven't typically been in the abortion wars, but I've worked on it. And that's exactly right, Richard. The trend is for Americans to prefer restrictions on especially late-term abortions. Late-term abortions, gender selection abortions, what are called half abortions, which were twins where one is essentially deleted, but really on the late-term things. I sat in a focus group recently where there were voters that voted just on the abortion issue, all women, and they found the notion of late-term abortion, 7, 8, 9, really late-term abortion, abhorrent. I mean, it was shocking. The reaction was extraordinary. But when you start talking about abortion as an issue, the Democrats will always win on that. Because when you encapsulate it to the right of a woman to control her body, that's a winning message, and it plays.
But the problem is, it raises money for Democrats and for progressives, and it will draw some people out to the polls. But you're talking about Christian fundamentalists, for the most part, who have their basis in opposing choice in their religious convictions. They believe to their core that any abortion is murder. And when thrust into a religious life and death decision, there will always be a great motivation for them to come down on the side of life. So while there is a chance that this will rally some Democrats and some progressives out there, it's not going to do anything to tamp down the fervor of the pro-life
And that,
groups.
in the end, is what hurts Republicans. I think voting rights is another example of that here, where I think if you talked about a voter ID or a picture ID, if you just left it to that, I think most Americans would say, hey, you know, it doesn't sound like that crazy idea. But then when it goes out to the degree that it does, and then you allow elements to define it, and that guy in Pennsylvania, the state lawmaker, said it's going to help us win here if we do this. It just confirms all the worst suspicions out there, and then we saw what happened. We all thought in November that the minority vote was going to be pushed down. Then we all saw the pictures, remember, in Florida and Ohio, where they're waiting 10, 11 hours
voting
online.
rights is gaming the system, and people see that as being unfair, whether they're from one political stripe or the other. They just see it as being unfair that you're fixing the system. Abortion's a different argument, at least in my mind, because it's not an electoral argument. It cuts to the core of morality and religion for some people.
Right.
And that's why I'm not so sure it'll have the effect that you're talking about.
The abortion thing also is changing so much because of 3D sonograms, where people are seeing the fetus earlier. They're seeing, 24 weeks, children laughing, smiling, things like that. It's really shaking up the system. But like gay marriage has swept across the country. You see conservatives, even a lot of Republicans and conservatives, even supporting gay marriage. I do as a conservative Republican, but not abortion.
We asked this even with gay marriage, where it's now, the Dick Cheneys of the world talking about his daughter. You have so many people, all political stripes, because people know people. It's not like it was a generation ago. People, they come out. Exactly. It's a loved one, it's a family member, it's a coworker, it's whatever it is. And I said to somebody last week, I said, okay, could you be a Republican and win a presidential primary in 20?
Probably
they said,
not.
No.
No.
So my only point is, until the GOP can say, all right, listen, we got a winner here with defined restrictions on abortion, not some broad sweeping thing. Right. On voting rights, don't do that, right? You're turning people off, and that's not what we want. We can't win votes. The whole idea is we want Latinos. Now all of a sudden we're trying to drive them away. Same thing with immigration. Yeah. Same thing here with issue after issue, even gay marriage. Is there any way that you see that the GOP doesn't want to repeat 2012 enough that the far right element of the party will bite their lip on stuff, or is that just an inevitable impossibility?
I think it depends on the state, and the trouble is it's a very interconnected nation, so that when a when somebody melts off in Texas, you hear it in New York. It's different cultures.
And I would say, I think there is a chance, but I don't know if 2016 is going to be it. But we saw the same thing with the Democrats. Years and years and years of losing at the national level. And finally, they got fed up enough where they said, all right, we're going to, not accept this extreme element of our party nationally, and we're going to move forward, and we're going to do what it takes to win. So I think we will see that eventually with the Republican Party. But I think on both of these cases, you look at public opinion polls, the American public is reasonable. As you mentioned, they want restrictions in certain areas. Not every, people feel that should a 14-year-old be allowed to go see a doctor about an abortion without telling her parents? No. Most people say no. Late-term abortions, most people say no. But in the case of rape, they say, yeah, that's something that may be reasonable. The same thing with voting rights. I mean, you mentioned the ID. People don't see that as crazy talk. You need an ID to get out a library book, for gosh sake. So the American public is much more reasonable on most of these issues and able to draw these distinctions.
That every time you get to the point where there seems to be a debate, somebody on the edge overplays their hand, and what I'm waiting for is a Republican leader to smack them down, and it doesn't happen. And until that happens, you're always going to lose these fights in these social issues, or at least recent memory says we will. All right, when we come back here, we talked about Washington being at a fulcrum of a lot of those things. Well, we will be joined by Congressman Eliot Engel. He's going to give us the inside on what he thinks will happen with immigration reform, what's going on with the Middle East, and why you ought to be concerned at home, and a host of other issues. Stay with us, everybody. We'll be right back.